some of the good questions here. Do you recommend dry or liquid yeast? Oh man, this is a great question. How much time do we have?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Wow, that's a great question. Okay. 5 years ago or even 3 years ago, Vito would have said liquid all the way.
Me too.
And that was because of a couple things, mainly the amount of or selection of
Right.
yeast. Dry yeast, you used to have like 4 or 5. When I started brewing, there wasn't much dry yeast. Within the last year or two, there's been what I like to call a dry yeast revolution, and I've been using dry yeast at the brewery. And there's a great amount of selection. The nice thing about dry yeast is when it's harvested is after that growth cycle I was talking about earlier, where the cell walls ingest oxygen and create their growth. So there's gonna be less lag time on dry yeast, which is good because you want to ferment as quick as possible to not allow any type of spoilage or anything like that. So nowadays, I won't say the verdict's still out, but dry yeast is definitely a good option. There's some amazing dry yeast from Lallemand and Cellar Science, and some of these other companies that are making some great dry yeast. Another thing, and I don't know where this came from, but I was always told, you can't repitch dry yeast. But I've been repitching dry yeast for a while now, and it works great too. And that harvesting the yeast and reusing it. Generally in homebrew, that's not a biggest thing, but for commercial brewers, that's definitely a plus.
Right. I agree with everything you said. I think, do you recommend one or the other? I think for me, it's dependent on the strain too.
It depends. Yes.
Some liquid yeast I really like, some dry yeast I really like. And I think it depends on the beer you're making, what you're going for. And I don't know, I think there's just, and that's what's fun part about brewing, right? Like, there's, one person may like this, one head brewer might like something else. So I think that's what's cool.
I mean, even when I was, liquid yeast only, I wasn't like a White Labs guy or a white yeast guy or a Giga yeast guy. There was strains from certain laboratories that I liked better than others. I'd have the Kolsch yeast from X, Y, and Z laboratories, and I really liked X more than I did Y, even though theoretically they're the same exact strain. A lot of it's just tasting, seeing what you enjoy, what others enjoy, learning how the yeast works, how it attenuates, how it flocculates, things like that. So, there's certain liquids I like, and there's certain dry ones I like more.
Exactly.
So,
I think the story I used to say is like I have my porter recipe that I always love to make, which is our Robo Porter MoreBeer kit.
Yeah.
And I remember back in the day, I brewed that like 10 times, and I used the same grain bill, same hops and everything, just changed the yeast, and man, it just completely changes the flavors. Like, one English yeast was like dried fruit, plum. Another one was dry. Another, it's amazing the different, flavors and characteristics that these yeasts will bring out. And so I ended up settling on the 1968 like English yeast from Y yeast. But I mean, that's what's fun.
One of my favorite, I talked about joining a homebrew club earlier, and I've got my homebrew club's sweatshirt on right now. But one of my favorite talks was right after I joined. There was some guys that were getting ready to go pro, and they were trying to figure out yeasts, and they actually did, it was 50-gallon batch or something, and split it into 51-gallon ferments, and they did, all kinds of yeast. So it wasn't just like this laboratory versus that laboratory. It was, Saison versus Cal Ale, and to see the same beer and how much impact yeast could have is amazing. I mean,
incredible.
Yeast, hops, barley, water, they all have it. But yeast, I mean, they're the ones making the beer, and they could completely change a beer. So playing around with yeast, learning it. My homebrew setup, the way I had it set up is I was a 10-gallon brewer, and 12 gallons I'd make, so I'd go 6-6. But I'd always do that to do things like that. To okay, I'm going to dry hop this one. I'm going to do 2 yeast and see which one I like better. And that allows you to kind of, learn okay, cool. I like this strain better than that strain. So definitely yeast is a huge part of it.